I saved my sister's Europe trip money from my gambling addict father. Now he wants to make amends, but we're struggling to trust him. I'm Samantha, 22F, and I need advice about my complicated family situation. My dad, Jack, 50M, has been struggling with a gambling addiction for as long as I can remember. It's caused endless problems for our family, but things have gotten even worse recently. I have two younger siblings, Emily, 17F, and Max, 14M. We've all had to deal with the fallout from Dad's addiction, but Emily has been affected the most. She has severe anxiety and depression, which I believe stems from the stress of living with an addict parent. To give you some background, our family used to be pretty normal. Dad worked as a successful sales manager, and Mom, Sarah, 48F, was a part-time teacher. We lived in a nice house in the suburbs, went on family vacations, and had big holiday gatherings. I remember being excited when Dad would come home from work, rushing to the door to give him a hug. Everything changed when I was about 8 years old. Dad's company went through layoffs, and he lost his job. He was out of work for several months, and that's when he started gambling. At first, it was just occasional trips to the casino with his buddies. He said it was to blow off steam while job hunting. But those trips became more frequent, and soon he was going almost every day. I remember the night Mom found out about Dad's gambling. They had a huge fight, screaming at each other until the early hours of the morning. Emily, who was only 3 at the time, cried herself to sleep. Max was just a baby, oblivious to the chaos around him. That was the first time I saw Mom cry, and it scared me more than anything. Dad promised to stop gambling and focus on finding a new job. For a while, things seemed to get better. He found work as a car salesman, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. But it didn't last long. The stress of the new job and the constant temptation proved too much for Dad. Within months, he was back at the casino, sometimes not coming home for days at a time. As we grew older, the impact of Dad's addiction became more apparent. We never knew if he'd come home with money for groceries or if he'd lost it all at the casino. Mom had to take on a second job as a waitress to keep us afloat, but it was never enough. There were times when the electricity was cut off, or we had to eat at soup kitchens because there was no food in the house. I remember one particularly bad winter when we couldn't afford to pay the heating bill. We all huddled in the living room, bundled up in blankets, with a small space heater as our only source of warmth. Emily got sick with pneumonia, and we couldn't even afford to take her to the doctor. Mom had to beg our neighbor, a retired nurse, for help. Despite all this, Mom always made excuses for Dad. She'd say he was trying his best or that he just needed more time to get better. But he never did. He promised to quit, attend a few Gamblers Anonymous meetings, and then relapse within weeks. It became a cycle we all knew too well. As the oldest, I tried to shield Emily and Max from the worst of it. I'd make up stories about why Dad wasn't home, or why we couldn't afford new clothes for school. I started babysitting and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood to help buy groceries or school supplies. It wasn't much, but it was something. Emily, being the middle child, took on the role of the peacemaker. She'd try to cheer Mom up when she was sad or distract Dad when he was in one of his moods. But the constant stress took its toll on her. She started having panic attacks in middle school and would often miss days because she was too anxious to leave the house. Max, the youngest, grew up never knowing a stable home life. He became withdrawn and quiet, spending most of his time playing video games or reading comics. It was his way of escaping the chaos around him. The breaking point came last month. Emily had been saving up for a school trip to Europe for 2 years. It was all she talked about, a chance to see the world and maybe even practice the French she'd been learning. She worked part-time at a local diner and put every penny into her savings account. The trip cost $3,000, and she finally had enough. One day, Emily came home from school and found her bank card missing. When she checked her account, all the money was gone. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. Dad had taken her card and emptied her account at the casino. Emily was devastated. She cried for days and refused to leave her room. When she finally came out, she told Mom and Dad that she wanted to move out and live with our aunt. Mom begged her to stay, saying we needed to stick together as a family. Dad promised he'd pay her back, but we all knew that was unlikely. I was furious. I told Dad he needed to get help or leave. Mom got angry at me for giving him an ultimatum. She said I was being selfish and that family should always stick together, no matter what. But I couldn't help thinking about all the times sticking together had hurt us more than helped. I remembered the time Dad missed my high school graduation because he was on a gambling binge. Or the Christmas when he pawned all our presents to place bets on a boxing match. Each memory fueled my anger and determination to protect my siblings. But I'm tired of watching my siblings suffer. Max has started acting out at school, and I worry he'll start gambling too if something doesn't change. He's been hanging out with a rough crowd lately, and I overheard him talking about betting on sports games. It scares me to think he might follow in Dad's footsteps. Emily's mental health is deteriorating, and I fear for her safety if she stays in this environment. She's stopped eating regularly and spends most of her time in bed. I've tried talking to her, but she just shuts down. It's like watching her fade away, and it breaks my heart. I've been living on my own for a few years now, ever since I started college. I work part-time at the bookstore and barely make enough to cover my own expenses. But I'm considering offering to let Emily and Max move in with me. My apartment is small, just a one-bedroom with a pull-out couch in the living room, but it's better than living with an addict and an enabler. However, I know this would devastate my parents, especially Mom. She's always been the glue holding our family together, even when things were at their worst. I remember how she'd stay up late, waiting for Dad to come home, just so she could make sure he was safe. Or how she'd skip meals so we kids could eat. The thought of taking her children away from her feels cruel. Am I wrong for wanting to separate my siblings from our parents? Should I give Dad another chance to get help? He's had so many chances before, but part of me still hopes he can change. Or is it time to put my foot down and prioritize my siblings' well-being over my parents' feelings? I feel lost and don't know what to do. Every option seems to hurt someone. If I do nothing, Emily and Max continue to suffer. If I take them away, I'll be breaking up our family and possibly pushing Dad further into his addiction. There's no clear right answer, and the weight of this decision is crushing me. Any advice would be appreciated. I just want to do what's best for my family, but I'm not sure what that is anymore. Update 1: It's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. It really helped me gain perspective on the situation and gave me the courage to take action. After much consideration, I decided to have a serious talk with my parents. I invited them over to my apartment one evening after work. I thought being on neutral ground might help keep things calm. Plus, I wanted them to see that I had a stable, if small, living space that could potentially house Emily and Max. When they arrived, I could tell Dad was in a bad mood. He kept fidgeting and checking his phone, signs I recognized from years of living with him. It usually meant he was itching to get to a casino or place a bet. Mom looked tired and anxious, her eyes darting between Dad and me as if preparing to mediate a fight. I took a deep breath and told them everything I'd been feeling. I explained how their behavior was affecting Emily and Max, and how I feared for their future if things didn't change. I told them about Emily's worsening depression and Max's troubling behavior at school. I even shared some of my own struggles, how hard it was to focus on my studies and work while constantly worrying about my family. As I spoke, I could see the pain in Mom's eyes. She reached out to hold my hand, something she hadn't done since I was a little girl. Dad, on the other hand, didn't take it well. He got defensive and started yelling about how hard his life was and how we didn't understand his struggles. He brought up his own childhood, something he rarely talked about. He told us how his father had been an alcoholic who would beat him and his siblings. How he'd sworn he'd never be like that gambling wasn't as bad because at least he never hit us. It was a shocking revelation, but it didn't excuse his behavior. The argument escalated, with Dad accusing me of trying to break up the family. Mom tried to calm him down, but he was too worked up. He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed in the small space, making Mom flinch. After he left, Mom broke down crying. She admitted that she knew things were bad, but she didn't know how to fix it. She was afraid of losing Dad if she pushed him too hard to get help. She told me about the times she tried to get him into rehab, how he'd always find a way to manipulate her into letting him come home. I held her as she cried, feeling like our roles had reversed. I told her that by protecting Dad, she was sacrificing her children. It was a hard conversation, but I think it finally got through to her. She agreed to think about what I'd said and to talk to Emily and Max about how they were feeling. The next day, I got a call from Emily. She was hysterical, her words coming out in broken sobs. It took a while to calm her down enough to understand what had happened. Apparently, Dad had come home drunk and started a huge fight with Mom. He accused her of turning us kids against him. Things got physical, and Mom ended up with a black eye. Emily had locked herself and Max in the bathroom, terrified of what might happen. They'd stayed there all night, coming out only when they were sure Dad had left for work. When they found Mom in the kitchen, her eye swollen and bruised, Emily knew she had to call me. That was the last straw for me. I immediately drove over and picked up Emily and Max. I brought them back to my apartment and told them they could stay as long as they needed. Emily was relieved, practically collapsing with exhaustion once we got home. Max was quieter, conflicted about leaving Mom alone with Dad. I called our aunt, Lisa, 46F, and explained the situation. Aunt Lisa has always been the voice of reason in our family. She's Mom's younger sister, and while they're close, Lisa has never shied away from calling out Dad's behavior. She agreed to check in on Mom and try to convince her to leave Dad. I hoped she could get through to Mom where I couldn't. For the next week, Emily, Max, and I adjusted to living together in my small apartment. It was cramped, with Emily sleeping on the pull-out couch and Max on an air mattress on the floor. But we made it work. I took time off work to help them settle in and make sure they had everything they needed. Emily seemed to be doing better away from the stress at home. She started talking about applying to colleges and making plans for the future. I caught her smiling a few times, something I hadn't seen in months. Max was quieter, but I noticed he was sleeping better and seemed less angry. He even offered to help with cooking dinner one night, something he'd never done at home. Dad tried calling a few times, but I didn't answer. He left voicemails alternating between apologies and angry rants. I saved them all in case we needed them for legal reasons later. It was hard listening to them, hearing the desperation and anger in his voice. Part of me still loved him and wanted to believe he could change. But I knew I had to stay strong for Emily and Max. Mom called every day to check on the kids. She sounded tired but more clear-headed than I'd heard her in years. She told me she was staying with Lisa for now and was considering her options. She'd been to see a doctor about her eye and was thinking about pressing charges against Dad. It was a big step for her, and I felt a glimmer of hope that things might really change this time. Yesterday, Mom called with news. She said she'd filed for a restraining order against Dad and was planning to divorce him. She asked if the kids and I would meet her at Lisa's house to talk about the future. It was a lot to process, and I could hear the mix of fear and determination in her voice. We're heading there this afternoon. I'm nervous but hopeful. It feels like we might finally be moving in the right direction. The road ahead won't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like our family has a chance at healing. I'll update again after the meeting. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and things have continued to change rapidly in our family. The meeting at Aunt Lisa's house was emotional but productive. When we arrived, Mom was sitting on the couch, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. But there was a determination in her eyes that gave me hope. Mom started by apologizing to Emily and Max for not protecting them better. She talked about how she'd grown up believing that keeping the family together was the most important thing, no matter what. Her own parents had stayed in an unhappy marriage, and she thought that's what she was supposed to do too. She promised to make things right and asked for their forgiveness. Emily was hesitant at first. She'd been hurt too many times to trust easily. But as Mom spoke, I could see Emily's walls starting to come down. Max, always more emotional, broke down and hugged Mom tightly. It was a tearful moment for all of us, a release of years of pent-up pain and fear. Mom explained that she had filed for divorce and was looking for a job to support herself. She'd been a stay-at-home mom for so long that the idea of re-entering the workforce terrified her. But she was determined to make it work. Aunt Lisa offered to let her stay as long as she needed, which was a huge relief. We all agreed that it was best for Emily and Max to continue living with me for now, at least until things settled down. Mom looked sad but understood it was for the best. We made plans for regular family dinners and outings, trying to rebuild our relationships in a healthier way. The peace was short-lived, though. Dad didn't take the news of the divorce well. One night, about a week after our meeting, he showed up at Lisa's house. He was drunk and angry, demanding to see Mom and the kids. When Lisa refused to let him in, he tried to force his way inside. He was yelling about how we'd ruined his life and torn apart his family. Lisa called the police, and Dad was arrested for violating the restraining order. Seeing him hauled away in a police car was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. Despite everything, he was still our dad, and part of me ached for the man he used to be. This incident seemed to be a wake-up call for Dad. After spending a night in jail, he finally agreed to enter a rehab program for his gambling addiction. He's been there for 6 weeks now, and according to his counselor, he's making progress. It's too early to tell if it will stick this time, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Emily has been seeing a therapist to work through her anxiety and depression. It's been a slow process, but she's gradually opening up about her feelings. She's learning coping mechanisms and starting to understand that she's not responsible for our family's problems. She's also started looking at colleges again and is excited about the possibility of studying psychology. I think her own experiences have inspired her to want to help others. Max is doing better in school. His grades have improved, and he's joined the school's robotics club. It's given him a positive outlet for his energy and introduced him to a new group of friends. He still misses Dad sometimes, but he understands why we can't live with him right now. We've had some good talks about addiction and how it affects families. I'm proud of how mature he's becoming. Mom found a job as an administrative assistant at a local community center. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. She's also been attending Al Anon meetings to learn how to set boundaries and stop enabling addictive behavior. I've seen a change in her. She stands taller, speaks more confidently. It's like she's rediscovering herself after years of living in Dad's shadow. As for me, I'm exhausted but relieved. Juggling work and taking care of my siblings hasn't been easy. There have been nights when I've wondered if I'm in over my head. But seeing them thrive makes it all worth it. I've had to postpone my own plans to go back to school, but I know I'm doing the right thing. We're taking things one day at a time. Dad calls once a week from rehab to talk to the kids. The conversations are awkward, but I think they're important for everyone's healing process. Emily usually keeps the calls short, still guarded with her emotions. Max tends to chat longer, eager to share about his robotics projects. I stay nearby during these calls, ready to step in if needed, but so far, they've been civil. Mom is talking about getting her own place soon. She's been looking at small apartments near her new job. Part of me worries that she might let Dad move back in once he's out of rehab, but I'm trying to trust that she's learned from this experience. We've had some honest conversations about codependency and the importance of maintaining boundaries. For now, we're focusing on healing and building a healthier family dynamic. It's not perfect, but it's progress. There are still tough days, times when Emily withdraws into herself, or when Max lashes out in frustration. But there are good days too, filled with small victories and moments of genuine happiness. I'm learning to take care of myself too. Aunt Lisa has been a godsend, offering to watch Emily and Max some weekends so I can have a break. I've started going to a support group for family members of addicts, which has helped me process my own feelings about Dad and our situation. As we move forward, I'm cautiously hopeful about our future as a family. We may have a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, it feels like we're all heading in the right direction. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have progressed. The journey hasn't been easy, but we've made significant strides as a family. Dad completed his 90-day rehab program and has been living in a halfway house for the past 3 months. It's been an adjustment for him, going from the chaos of addiction to a structured environment with rules and responsibilities. He's attending regular GA meetings and has found a job working at a local warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and he seems committed to staying on track. Last month, Dad reached out to me directly for the first time since entering rehab. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. He looked different, older somehow, but also clearer. He apologized for everything he'd put us through and said he understood if we couldn't forgive him. It was a difficult conversation, filled with long silences and painful memories. But it felt like a step in the right direction. Mom moved into a small apartment of her own 2 months ago. It's a modest place, but she's made it cozy and inviting. She's still working at the community center and has even received a small promotion. The extra responsibility suits her. I can see her confidence growing day by day. She's also been taking night classes to improve her computer skills. It's amazing to see her regaining her independence and rediscovering her own interests. The divorce proceedings are ongoing, but Mom and Dad have agreed to mediation to keep things as amicable as possible. It's not always smooth sailing. There have been arguments over finances and property division, but they're both committed to avoiding a lengthy court battle. Emily and Max are still living with me, but we've settled into a good routine. My tiny apartment feels more like home now, filled with the sounds of homework discussions, video game battles, and occasional sibling squabbles. It's not always easy being their guardian, but I wouldn't change it for anything. Emily started her first semester of college, majoring in psychology. The transition wasn't easy. She had a panic attack during her first week of classes, but she's persevered. She's thriving in her classes and has made some good friends. Her therapist says she's made significant progress in managing her anxiety. I've noticed she smiles more often and seems more comfortable in her own skin. Max is doing well in high school. He made the honor roll last semester, something that seemed impossible a year ago. He's talking about joining the school's debate team, which I think would be great for his confidence. He's been spending more time with Dad lately, which I was initially worried about, but it seems to be good for both of them. They go fishing or work on model airplanes together, activities that don't involve gambling or money. As for me, I've adjusted to my role as a surrogate parent. It's been challenging, but also rewarding. I've learned a lot about myself and what I'm capable of. There are still days when I feel overwhelmed, but I'm getting better at asking for help when I need it. I've even started dating someone who understands and supports my family situation. It's early days, but it feels good to have someone in my corner. We had our first family dinner together last week, Mom, Dad, Emily, Max, and me. It was awkward at first, with everyone on their best behavior, tiptoeing around sensitive topics. But as the evening progressed, it started to feel almost normal. We talked, laughed, and even made plans to celebrate Max's upcoming birthday together. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Of course, things aren't all sunshine and roses. Dad still struggles with temptation sometimes. He called me late one night, saying he was outside a casino and didn't know what to do. We talked until the urge passed, and he went to an emergency GA meeting instead. It was a close call, but he's learning to reach out for help when he needs it. Mom has moments of doubt about the divorce. There are days when she misses the familiarity of her old life, even with all its problems. But she's staying strong and focusing on building a new life for herself. Emily and Max still have trust issues to work through. They're cautious about letting Dad back into their lives, afraid of being hurt again. But they're trying, and that's what matters. I'm cautiously optimistic about our future as a family. We may not live under the same roof anymore, but we're stronger and healthier than we've been in years. It's been a long, difficult journey, but I'm proud of how far we've come. There's still a lot of work to do, a lot of trust to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're on the right path. Whatever challenges come our way, I know we'll face them together, as a family.